5, lesson 7. Whether you know it or not, you fell with Adam in the garden. It's very important that you realize that. When he blew it, when he messed up, you were right there with him, and you were guilty of the same thing. 1 Corinthians 15:22. 1 Corinthians 15:22. Everyone dies because all of us are related to Adam, being members of his sinful race, and wherever there is sin, death results. But all who are related to Christ will rise again. So yes, we all died the same day that Adam died. That was propagated down through the race for all eternity. But there's a wonderful promise there. In the same way that death started reigning through Adam and will reign throughout all humanity, once you become related to Christ, you are now related to him in his life, in his resurrection. And that's a great counter to the death that was introduced in Adam. In the last chapter, we talked about the overall consequences of the event of Adam's fall. We specifically considered the first half of the problem that action caused. That first half of the problem, and we're going to talk about the second half today, but the first half of the problem was an exalted soul. The soul is now operating in a place that it was not designed to operate in. It had assumed the rulership. It had assumed now the dominion of each individual human being. And it was not designed, it was not intended for that to take place. Today, we're going to start talking about the second half of the problem that Adam introduced. The soul's potential for strongholds. The soul's potential to host, to have, to build strongholds. Today, we're going to talk about the subconscious mind. What is the subconscious mind? How do we begin to understand how the subconscious functions? Let's start our discussion by thinking of the subconscious mind as a memory bank, or if you want to call it, an advanced filing cabinet. Stored inside are past experiences and various information. It isn't limited to just the facts and the documents, because it utilizes the soul's intellectual and emotional dimensions to store what we see, hear, feel, and experience. Did you catch that? It's not just remembering facts and figures and information. The subconscious, the mind is actually grabbing the totality of the experience, not just the details of what happened, but how did it make you feel? What do you think was the motive? What are the reasons associated with this? Not just the facts and the figures. It would be great if you look back over, I live in an engineering world, so you come across projects sometimes, it's like, we have a question about this. Why did they do that when they built it? I don't know. It wasn't my project. We try and find notes or whatever about that. It should be great if in those notes they wrote down everything about what had transpired, not just the facts. Hey, we did this and this was the result, and here's the data, and then we tried this. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you going through at this point? It would be great to have all that in a file somewhere. Well, congratulations. You do have all that in a file in your head somewhere. All the feelings, all the emotions, all the experiences, plus all the information. It's powerful and yet dangerous at the same time. And that's what we're going to talk about, is the possibility for this thing to go awry. Let's start with a little comparison between the conscious versus the subconscious. You can draw a little table on your notepad if you want to. You can get the slides later. And we're going to compare and contrast these for just a little bit. Starting with the conscious mind, the first item, limited amount of mental activity. So if you consider how much activity the brain actually does in the course of a day or a year or whatever, the conscious side of it is just going to have a limited portion of all the total brain activity. The subconscious, on the other hand, has the vast majority of the mental activity. Some researchers believe 85 to 90% of all of the mental activity that takes place is done in the subconscious, leaving 10 or 15% in the conscious mind. That's staggering to me. I would not have thought that those numbers were that drastic, but that is, yes, but that just tells you how frequently and how much that subconscious is running. And we'll talk about that in just a second. The conscious mind is cognitive. That means you are aware of what you're thinking about. Now, you don't necessarily have to pay attention to it, but before it enters the conscious mind, you have to be intentionally thinking it. You have to be, I'm making a decision to think about this. We are aware of what's going on there. The subconscious, on the other hand, is involuntary of the conscience. And if you think about subconscious, sub means below the surface. So it's happening in a way that you don't even realize it's happening. You're not even aware of what it is processing, of what it is thinking about, of what it is doing. And it's doing that 85, 90% of all your mental activity. Okay, if you're going to take a picture, this will be the one. I'm going to change to a different page. Moving right along. Okay. The conscious mind shuts down during rest. That's one of the reasons that you need to sleep. That's one of the reasons that you need to rest, is to let your conscious mind relax for a little bit, to let it unwind, to let it recharge. The subconscious mind is always working. It never stops. Even when you're asleep, it never stops. It's still running. It never slows down. I mentioned dreams in parentheses there. With the conscious mind out of the way during your sleep cycle, your conscious mind is like turned off or limited in its capacity at that moment. Sometimes God will speak to you better when you're coming out of sleep or going into sleep, because your conscious mind's out of the way. It can't really hinder what God wants to reveal to you or God wants to say to you. So while you're asleep, your conscious mind is resting. Where do dreams come from? Your subconscious is trying to tell you something. It could be from God. It might not be from God. I don't know, but it's trying to relay information to you, and it has to pick that time so that the filter of the conscious mind is out of the way for it to do its job.
I would ask you, classify dreams as subconscious. But when you're in a dream, you feel pretty conscious.
Right, right. And you may wake up enough for the subconscious to pass it to the conscious. I'm not saying that your conscious is, but the process where it started in the subconscious, and your conscious is out of the way enough for it to get the signal, for it to get the transmission.
Pretty quickly wake up, but I've had a dream where I've got opportunity through my dream, and it's, I mean, it is clear and it impacts me, you know, still to this day, you know.
And whether it's a dream or not, I've had God tell me stuff about a problem I've been thinking about, and sometimes it's right as I wake up. It's like, oh, whoa, that's it. What happened there? My subconscious is trying to tell me something, and my conscious mind, no, that's not it. No, we're not going that way. No. And it's finally out of the way, and it doesn't have a resistance. It doesn't have an opposition to get that information to me.
So could your conscious be in the now and the subconscious in your before?
Perhaps. I would think that all of them can operate in all the dimensions, but when we're conscious, when our conscious mind is working, it operates as the filter. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to think about that. Or here's the way we're going to do this. So you're already predisposed to considering from a certain direction.
Like a soldier was talking about, everyone thinks that their way is right, but in the end it leads to death. You know, God, men make actions, but God listens to the motive of that action.
Right.
A lot of times people will do things, and that they have trained themselves to have feelings and emotions and opinions about things that they don't even really recognize, that actually makes them make an immediate conscious decision.
Yes.
Concerning something that they don't even understand.
Yes.
A lot of times they even block themselves from being honest with themselves, like, I'm going to teach this.
Yes.
But they consciously try to convince themselves that they're teaching it because they want the best for that person.
Right. And that's where we're going with what the subconscious is doing, and how all this was introduced with what Adam did. It was intended to, and we'll talk about this, it was intended to make things easier for you, to take some of the rote processing out of the way, and let you kind of go on autopilot. But it depends on how it's programmed, whether that's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing. The conscious, it works with the will and the emotions. It needs the will and the emotions to support what it is thinking about, to operate in what it is thinking about. It expects the will and the emotions to respond to what it is thinking about. The subconscious, by comparison, comes before the will and the emotions, and it can work independently of them. Meaning the decision has already been made, the action has already been started before you even realize what's happening. So you don't have any will, ability to stop it. You don't have any emotional ability to stop it. You are just walking out the program. You're walking out the way that you were instructed to walk out before you had an opportunity to change course.
Does it do more than dreams?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's running
I like
everything.
dreams.
It's-
That's something.
dreams are just one of the languages of the subconscious, if you want to call it that. Yeah, go.
Question, man, I don't want to put this in God's mouth, because God's the all great, but if God worked in the conscious and subconscious, because when he made the earth, he made Adam. Before Adam, the angels, Lucifer, did he have a subconscious saying that since there's evil on the earth before man, will anything go wrong?
I don't know. I'm going to guess that the angels are weird because I don't know how they were designed. They don't have. I can argue that they do have free will, and I can argue that they don't have free will. I can argue it from both sides, and I'm not sure how that works. When Satan fell, it said iniquity was found in him. Where did it come from? His pride, which means he has the opportunity for free will, but why did all the rest, and then a third of the angels went with him. So again, if you really had free will about it, then you should be able to return from the, anyway, I don't know. I don't know how that, it's a good question. Anyway. So, one other point, the conscious mind deals with active memories only. So if you're walking around and you suddenly start thinking about something, what actually happened? Most likely you sensed, you smelled, you heard something in your subconscious that went and pulled the file, and that put it back up into your active thoughts. It wasn't there originally. The subconscious does not, I'm sorry, the conscious mind is only active. It doesn't go and get things just to be getting them. You choose to think about them. The subconscious, it's all memories, not just the active ones, not just the ones that you're thinking about. And because it's dealing with all the memories, it often activates a memory that puts it back up into the conscious mind. It remembers something that you haven't been thinking about. You walk through the house and you smell the cookies baking. And where's your mind go? Oh, this smells like grandma's house. Or you smell a certain cologne or something, and oh, that reminds me of such and such person. Were you actively thinking that? You weren't. You picked up a scent. Your subconscious went and grabbed the file folder that said, hey, this scent is related to this. And now you're thinking about it. It pulled it into your active memory. Does everyone see how that works?
That's almost like a person that has dementia.
Right.
They lose their consciousness and pull from the subconscious.
And yield to the subconscious more, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff inside that subconscious. Yeah. The contents of the subconscious shape everything about you. They determine much of your personality. They form your habits, both good and bad. They control your actions or your reactions, and they basically become your belief center. The collection of these things determines what you really believe. Not just what you say you believe, but what you really believe and you act on without having to think about it. God made us in such a way that a few repetitions, our conscious mind assumes control and does the job for us. In the book, he goes through several examples. You remember when we were learning to drive? And it's like, oh, crud, I've got this whole list of 50 things I've got to do. I've got to make sure my hand's in the right place on the wheel. I've got to put the brake or the drive gear shift in the right gear, make sure my foot's on the brake. Got to check my blinker. I got to turn on my blinker. I got to check my mirror. I got to check the rear view mirror. I got to do all this stuff. And then I can finally start hitting the gas. It's a real complicated list. And for those of you that have taught teenagers how to drive, you see the frustration, I guess, in them having to learn this list when you've already got it down. Now, my question to you is, when did you get it down? How did you get it down?
Driver's ed.
Driver's ed?
We had driver's ed in school.
But you still had to drive. You still had to do it a few times or even several times before all this list started to make sense. And once that started happening, now what can you do? You just go through the checklist without actually having to think about the checklist, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to think about, I need to put my foot on the brake before I hit the gas pedal. I need to put my foot on the brake before I shift it into drive or reverse. You don't even think about it anymore. After you've done it, and after you've done it, and after you've done it, the subconscious takes this list of stuff and makes it an autopilot program. And that's how it was designed to be helpful for us, so that we don't have to spend all this time thinking through each step on the list. Now think about how many activities you do in the course of a day that are like that. I mean, he mentioned tying your shoes. What other things do you do during the course of the day that you don't even have to think about anymore? And at one point, when you first learned how to do them, you had to think about it. Brushing your teeth. Makeup, okay. I'm trying to teach my grandson now how to brush his teeth. Okay, you need to start on the bottom. You're going to do the outside on the right. Then you're going to do the front on the right. Then you're going to do the outside on the left. Then you're going to do the top on the bottom, the top side of the bottom teeth. Then you're going to do the inside on the left, inside on the front, inside. And then you do the same thing on the top side.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, in this case, it would be easier. But it seems crazy as I'm going through this list with him. It's like, why don't you get this? Why don't you already understand? And I've got to realize he's learning it for the first time. He hasn't had enough repetition to know all this stuff and for it to become automatic to him. I had to go through the same process. So that's the role of the subconscious. That's how God designed it. I'm going to take all this information and I'm going to start condensing it for you, and it's going to do the processing so that you don't have to worry about it. And in an ideal world, there's nothing negative that ever gets entered into the subconscious mind. So all these programs are clean. All these programs are pure. If anybody has, I know you've done computer programming. Has anybody else done any computer programming at all? You've heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out. Whatever you put in, it was just going to do what it says, and it's going to execute and give you the results based on what you put in. Now, when you're writing a computer code, you sit there and you write and you do all these steps. And when you first run it, it'll check some basic things. Okay, I started a loop, I ended the loop. I started an if, I ended the if-then statement. I started a go-to, and I have a place to go to. It checks all this stuff to make sure that it has an idea of what you're trying to accomplish. That does not prevent it from you locking it in a loop. And I'm going to start a loop here, and I'm going to do something, and it's going to go over here and check, and then come back in the loop, and it's going to go over here and check, and come back in the loop. But while it's over here, if it never finds the answer that it's looking for to exit the loop, it keeps going back and forth. Why aren't you doing it right? I didn't tell it the right thing to evaluate. I didn't go get the right information, so it's still stuck in this loop. I've locked them up many times.
That's why happens to a lot of high efficiency areas. They're modulating.
Right.
Things like that.
Does it mean the system's broken? It means it's doing exactly what it's being told to do. There's just something in the instructions that isn't right, that isn't clear, that doesn't make sense from a physical perspective. I'm trying to get information that it can't get, that it can't reach, that it can't receive. Your subconscious is the same way. It follows the program. It cannot help it if your program is junk. It can't. What am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to respond to this? Even worse is when it is right. It gets you to a designated end, but the end is totally wrong. The end is a response to something that you don't want to do anymore. The end is a habit. The end is an addiction. The end is something else that you don't want to do. But yet that's the program. And it runs it over and over and over and over again, and you can't stop it. It is usually good when the subconscious does this process, this automation process with facts, processes, and techniques. Things get more interesting when you realize that it also does this with perceptions, feelings, thoughts, initial senses, and reactions. So it's not just facts. It's not just information. It's how that made you feel. How did that make you, did that make you happy? Did that make you sad? Did that hurt you? Did that hurt your feelings? Do you feel loved? Do you not feel loved? Your reaction to what happened is included in the instruction set that's now entered in as the code, as the program for your subconscious mind. These are your versions of reality. The individual images that form a belief system, or you could call that a paradigm. And it's that belief system that the subconscious accesses the next time a similar situation comes up. And it pulls that up into active memory, and you find yourself doing things before you even realized what you're doing. It's running the program. So how do we fix this? We've got to go back and change the program. But sadly, most of us don't even realize there's a program running. Well, why can't I fix this? Why can't I beat this? Well, I'm sorry, there's a program. It's doing exactly what it's being told to do. We just got to go figure out how to change the program.
Renew never mind will change something.
It will change it, yes.
Word.
But you got to do it intentionally. And that's where most people miss it. They try and do it for 2 weeks, and that's not enough repetition of the new program to change anything.
I started reading scripture. I made commitments for 11 years ago. And I wasn't doing anything else different other than purposefully putting scripture in at the start of every day. And I started watching myself change. I started thinking words here, but different words would come
Right.
here. It was so powerful how just renewing this so that it believes what God says is true is true. It is powerful.
And what you got to do is get to the place where you're not renewing your conscious mind, but when you're renewing your subconscious mind. And the only way you can do that is over and over and over and over and over again. It doesn't just happen with a one-time experience. It doesn't just happen, hey, I'm going to do this for 2 weeks and see what happens.
It's just like the seed on
And still, yeah,
But I'm telling you, it's rooted so deep now that.
Yes.
when you do life in general, it just pulls that up.
Yes.
It's true. This, I mean, there's a scripture that says, if you know what the right thing is to do, and you do not do it, that's a sin for you. That comes up for me constantly when I think a thought that goes outside of what I know is the right thing to do. And do not grow weary in doing good. That's the other. one.
right.
Because you can really easily find yourself just a little off course. Oh, it's okay if I do this time. And that little thing will change the way you're programmed.
Yes.
And so that scripture comes up.
Yes.
You might feel weary in doing good. Not you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I think that's also true in spiritual warfare, like that. So in spiritual warfare, like, I think that term is used too loosely, and we'll often think, oh, yeah, we're going to fight the demons and all this kind of stuff. But how would you fight the demons if someone gave you a sword and you've never seen a sword before? How would you know how to use the sword? Right? How could you fight them off? But you have to do that. You know, you have to train yourself. And you know, one thing is like my daughter, she's gone through a lot of anxiety and depression and stuff like that. And there was a time when she confessed to me, she's like, I think there's maybe some spiritual thing, you know, affecting me. And finally I was like, I might have told her before, but finally I was like, oh my gosh, I think, why in the heck did I not see this before? It was a deception because of the whole year of her life, you know, we go through this thing. She said, and I was like, wow, why didn't I see that before? Now I have the tools to help you, you know, through this. And to me, it was exciting in a way. So when we talked through it, we had a series, you know, I helped her out, you know, we walked through prayer and all that kind of stuff. And we had some friends that came over, we really you know, prayed and wanting for, room oil, and she had a session where she just like forgave everyone, all of that. Then the next day, she had an attack again, and it was just like a random thing, and it's all, you never know. And it came again at the weirdest time when everything was happy, when she came to me, and I felt God telling me at the time, like, that same thing, how do you know how to fight if I've given you the tools, but you haven't trained yourself on it? So
Right.
I've given you everything that you need.
Right.
So in the moment she was going through that, I was able to, you know, help her out, but I wanted her to be able to say those words, because you need to take this now and you need to fight for yourself. Because she, in the moment, there was a moment where when we were praying, it was like some hardcore intercession, and there was something there, and eyes dilating and the whole 9 yards with, you know, crazy stuff happening. And then in that moment, she had this just like sheer panic and doubt, like, you know, God doesn't exist at all. And, you know, my life worth it, all this weird stuff. But then after that, God was telling me the same thing, like, you know, with consistent prayer. So what I tried to help her with is like using scripture, using, you know, repetitive scripture to train your mind. You have to train yourself and train your mind to know how to use that sword. When it
Right.
comes. You also have to know who you are, your identity in Christ. You have to be able to tell yourself and preach to yourself in those moments when you feel vulnerable. And we did that for weeks following, you know, we would quiz each other on scriptures. And since then, she's never had an attack.
Cool.
You know, any anxiety attack. And I think a lot of that has to do with like, Satan's not going to want to come mess with you anymore, you know? He knows you have the tools to fight it off. It's all. Yeah.
He goes about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. There are some people that he can't devour.
If you pray them a week,
Yes.
you know, and when you train yourself to become strong and you work out those muscles, right? I mean,
It's because you get so comfortable in not speaking back. And that's where it gets us, is that we don't speak the truth out of our mouths. We have to do it with the mouth, and most people are whispering in their heads. And God hears that, but the enemy doesn't, so you're not practicing authority.
He has limited resources too. He's not omnipresent like God is. He can't be everywhere at one time. So he's got to target his attacks on what's going to give him the most return on his investment, if you want to call it that. ROI is kind of an interesting term to apply there, but he's only got limited resources. He's only got limited ability. I've said before, and I'm not to the point yet, but it's my goal in life to become somebody that's too expensive for the enemy to mess with. Yeah, you may fight with me, but I'm going to occupy so many of your forces to get this done that it's not going to be worth your time in slowing me down to get there. Or you may put something on me, but I'm going to make you pay for it.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet, but that's my goal. Is I want to be somebody that's too expensive for him to mess with. Anyway, before we go on about this paradigm thing, you got to understand, you got to realize the paradigm is your belief system. It's the way it's the way you believe things to be. It doesn't mean that that's the truth. It's the way that you believe them to be for you. So your paradigm can be different than my paradigm. Your paradigm about this can be different than my paradigm about that. It's how you believe things are in your world, from your experience, from the way that you had things happen or didn't have things happen. It's all from your perspective. It's all relative. It's not based in truth, just truth to you, if you want to use truth in quotation marks there. So a paradigm is a mindset or a filter for our either actions or our inactions. You can have a paradigm for the way business is supposed to run. How about race? You can have a paradigm about spirituality. You can have a paradigm about marriage. You can have a paradigm about love. You can have a paradigm about God. Fill in the category, and you can have a paradigm about that particular topic. And your paradigm will be totally different than anybody else's paradigm because it's unique to you. It's what you believe to be true about that area. Not necessarily that it is true. It's what you believe to be true.
Like what's going on in society.
Right. There are two factors that we need to consider about these mental images and the effect that they have on us. Let's talk about those. So the first idea that I want to talk about is possibilities. And I don't really like this word, but it's the best one I can come up with at the point. There are some possibilities when you start thinking about what is this mental image going to do? The first possibility is, does this image become a belief or a controlling memory? Was there enough of it there? Was it repetitive enough? Did it happen enough for this to become an actual belief, a controlling memory in my life? There are some things that are going to happen to you that happen once and you don't ever revisit them. Yeah, they're stored in there, but that didn't ever become a belief system to you. It didn't happen repetitively. It didn't happen over and over again. It is possible that something does not become a belief at all. It just happened. Is it still in your subconscious? Yes. But it didn't happen again, so the subconscious never had to pull that file and add to the file. If it does reform a belief, if it does become a belief, then we've got to consider the second possibility of a mental image. And that is the strength of that resulting belief. How strong is that belief to you? Now, then there are two factors that go into, okay, I've got this belief system and it got established and it has a certain level of strength to it. What two factors establish whether or not it became a belief or whether it became a strong belief or a weak belief? The two factors. Combination of these two factors determine what possibility happens. The first, repetitious information. How many times did you go through that cycle? How many times did that file repeat itself? Go ahead. Right. The mental image, the computer recollection of the experience that you had before. You had an experience when you're 2, and then you had an experience that's similar when you're 4, and then you had another experience when you're 7, and then you had another experience when you move into adult life. I had an experience with, I don't know, drugs when I was this age, and then the next week I had another experience with drugs, and then the next week I had another experience with drugs. Whatever topic you're talking about, how many times did you have an experience that gets added to the file? How thick is the file on that particular topic? In your subconscious filing system, in your subconscious brain, how thick is the file for that?
How deep is the root?
How deep is the root? Right. And surely you see that the more times, the more pieces of paper I stick in the file, the more times that has come up, the stronger that thing's going to be. Right? Or at least it has the possibility of being stronger. Now, if I open a file and there's one sheet of paper in there, is that going to be a belief system for you? Probably not. You're probably not ever going to encounter that thing again. But if I've got a file that's a foot thick.
Well, but also it could depend on like the significance of that.
Yes, that's number 2. Yeah, I love it when you go ahead, man. It's awesome. It means we're on the same track. It means you're with me. I like it. So before we go to that, the counter on this repetitious information determines the long-term significance it has on our beliefs. So if I was to count the number of sheets in the file, 1, 2, 3, 4, how many times this thing has come up in your life? The more times, the higher the counter, the thicker the file, the more likely this is going to be an issue. Go ahead.
Can you say that first statement again? The longer you do what?
The longer you have the experience, the longer.
Use the words you used before. The longer you do something with the file, that was good. The longer you.
I'm sorry, I don't remember. Yes, and I would have to catch the word.
You said the longer you do something with the file, did you?
Yeah, the more you repeat the same information, the thicker the file gets.
The more you experience, the more you
Experiential knowledge, though. So
retrieve.
it could be, what's gonna do, if you repeat that information over and over again, it becomes a stronghold or a kitchen.
It can. It doesn't say it automatically will, but it can. It's more likely on a thick file than on a thin file. Right. And then the second part is what Adam was talking about, impactful information. So on one side, you got how many times the event occurs. And then on the other side of it, and they work together, is how significant was that information when it entered? And I'm talking about like traumatic events. You were at the robberies, you're at the grocery store, and you saw, as you were approaching the grocery store, you saw somebody run out with a gun. You knew they had just robbed the store. Okay, that's one level of trauma. Okay, next time you're in the store when it happens, would you agree that that's a higher level of trauma? The third time the gun gets pulled on you, you're not going back to the store. Okay. Touche. Touche. But do you see how the strength, the significance, the impact of that event adds to the possibility of it becoming a belief system? So the two work together. How often does this occur, and how strong is it each time that it occurs? Information that carries with it more significant impact needs only to be experienced once or just a few times before it influences our belief. Let me ask you this question. As a kid, I'm sure you put your head on the hot stove at least once. Your hand. If you did your head, that's a different problem, but you put your hand or your finger on the hot stove, it probably happened to all of us at least once. I'm hoping it only happens once. If it happened more than once, I either question how stubborn you are, or I question your learning abilities. Do you see the significance of putting your hand on it? You felt something immediately from doing that. And that said, okay, I'm not doing this again. I don't want to be hurt again. I don't want to experience this again. So I'm not going there. It only took once. Because the significance, the impactfulness was high enough that it created a belief system all on its own with the one event. Impact refers to the way that we feel when we experience it. It's not even really the name of the emotions, but the strength or the intensity of the emotions involved. Or in this, the touching the stove, the physical pain involved. How strong did that make you feel? How deeply did that impact you? Thoughts can't cause emotion. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And it's kind of lays through that, but imagine before Adam fell. The only experiences they have in their memory banks are positive. There's never any isolation. There's never any lack of love. There's never any, you're horrible, you're a bad person. There's none of that stuff prior to the fall. So what does the subconscious have in its filing system? Everything is positive. You can open a file and it don't matter how thick it is. Every sheet in that file cabinet is positive. It had a good result, it had a good outcome. You felt better about the situation. So you don't even care what things you open. And that system got totally trashed the moment he fell, and now all sorts of negative stuff become the predominant input into the file system.
So if I get shot 1,000 times, that means that I don't have emotions or belief systems. Like I don't believe that this is harmful, or I don't. What is that with the subconscious? It's like a person in the street still keep getting shot.
I don't know. I don't know how they're setting themselves up for that. Especially when things seem to just happen to you. Now, the common denominator is you. I mean, I've talked to people that said, well, this person got mad at me at the job and they fired me. And then this person didn't give me a good grade. And this person this. And everything's about what all these other people are doing to you. And I'm like, okay, the common denominator in all these stories is you. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what attitude you are presenting. I don't know the way you're conducting yourself. I don't know what you're saying, or I don't know what you're doing to manifest the situation. But there's some program in there that you're running that keeps getting you the same result over and over and over again. And then it's reinforcing the result over and over and over again.
Definitely, that's very possible. I think it could also be another thing where it's like people that are in, for example, highly traumatizing environments, extremely intense, traumatic environments. If it happens, things happen over and over to them, and they have really no control. They go through a cycle, right? You wonder, like, oh my gosh, that's awful and painful. Don't do that again. Happens again and again and again, and it's to feel like, well, it's starting to feel like my fault. But then it keeps happening again and again and again to them when it really isn't their fault. Well, they go into a defense mechanism.
Right.
Fight or flight,
Right.
And their body and their natural instinct is to desensitize
Yes.
from the trauma, right? And that's why, like, I used to foster when I was younger, my wife and I, and when, you know, when we would see kids coming from really, really traumatic places, they would come into a structured home and it's traumatic for them to be in a structured home because they constantly understand what it's like to be in a traumatic, and that becomes normal to them.
Right.
And so I think that that's also a possibility too, like you become desensitized, because it's like a human defense mechanism. That's a dangerous place to be.
You have developed a belief system based upon something. Again, it's true or not true. It doesn't even matter if it's true. It's true to you. It's your perception of all these things that keep happening to you. How do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? What adjustments do you make in your life to allow your life to continue? How do you defend yourself? How do you protect yourself? You may become an alcoholic in that situation to cope with this trauma that keeps coming over. You may have horrible relationships. I don't know how you cope with it, but the root of how you're coping with it comes from this belief system that you've established, right or wrong, about the way that you are. And that's where the majority of our problems come from. We don't realize I'm doing this to cope with this bad belief system over here, and I'm never going to deal with it by dealing with what I'm coping with. I've got to go deal with the root of the belief system before this will ever change. We try to put a Band-Aid on the coping mechanism, and instead of realizing I'm coping for something, there's some other thing that's driving me to do that, and whatever I do here won't change until I go back to the root of that thing and I deal with the root of it. When the mental images are strong enough repetition, impact, or combination of the two, our subconscious constructs a belief structure called a stronghold. Although stronghold can technically be either positive or negative, the Bible typically deals with only the negative. Let's read the verse where it talks about only the negative side of strongholds. 2 Corinthians 10:4. 2 Corinthians 10:4. We fight with weapons that are different from those the world uses. Not merely human weapons, not of flesh. Our weapons have power from God that can destroy the enemy's strong places. And he goes on to define that as strongholds or fortresses. So the enemy's strong places, strongholds, fortresses. The Greek word is ahurama. Ahurama. G3794, if you want to look that up. Translated stronghold, it means a castle, fortress, stronghold, a place from which to rule or hold on to something. It also refers to anything upon which one relies. In other words, the arguments and reasonings by which a disputant endeavors to fortify his opinion and defend it against an opponent. Isn't that interesting? Your stronghold is where you have built fortifications for when somebody tries to say, okay, your issue is this. You can't get me, I'm behind my wall. You can't touch me, I'm behind my defenses. I'm behind my fortress that's going to protect my ability to have that opinion, whether what you're telling me is right or wrong.
Depends on your strong, what your stronghold's made out
It does,
of.
yes, but it's usually negative. It's usually not a positive. It's usually a negative thing. Somebody calls you on it. Hey, you do this when this happens. Who do you think you are? You do this when this happens. What are you talking about? The defenses go up immediately. Whether you realize they're going up or not, you've entrenched yourself in this fortress. And the walls get higher and thicker the more times somebody else tries to come in from the outside and tell you you're living in a prison.
Well, I'm thinking of what that says, that this bad struggle.
That's what I'm talking about. You're still defending your position to be there.
Oh, if I have a bad.
Right. Whenever this happens, here's how you react. What do you mean? I don't always react like that. Who do you think you are? You do the same thing. Have you heard all these arguments before? Have you shared these arguments before? Don't raise your hand.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yes.
That's a huge.
Yes.
Stop being so sensitive.
Right.
Sensitive.
I have the right, and I'm not saying that all this is true. I'm just saying the fact of the matter is, once the stronghold is built, you're behind it. You don't want that thing to come down. It's going to resist coming down because it's normal to you. It's what you've always lived with. It's typical for you. You'd be uncomfortable if you had to change, if you had to come out from there and do something different.
It's a comfort.
It's a comfort zone, whether it's good or bad. And most of the time, these are bad. But the way that we keep finding ourselves there is somebody comes from the other side of the stronghold and says, okay, there's your problem. What are you talking about? No, it isn't. And these defenses go up. That's my belief system. It's bad the way that belief system was created. I'm not saying that it was a good thing, but you have the right, and the system is functioning correctly. It's just programmed with junk.
Is that what he's talking about in 2 Corinthians?
Yes.
4?
Yes. The enemy has built this position in your mind.
Oh, I thought it was the enemy had built the position.
He does. It says enemies, strong places. So he is on one side of this thing saying, you have every right to stay here. You have every right to be like this. You have every right to present your truth about the situation. And it's not truth. It's your opinion of the truth. You built it. He helped you. And now you're defending your right to have it. Your right to stay there.
He's validating the facts rather than the truth.
Correct. And the facts include how you felt about that experience, what that did to you. And of course, they're distorted. They're blown way out of proportion. He's a master at deception. So however he helped you build it, he lied. And now you're trapped. No, good. Note that this verse says that these structures are controlled by the enemy. It says the enemy's strong places. Who controls it? The enemy. Who's supposed to control all the places in your heart and in your mind? God and his spirit. And we lost that when Adam blew it. We lost that automatic control by God of the spirit and of the soul. So now he has filled in the blanks with whatever was available to him. And the devil made sure that he assisted that process by adding his deceptions, adding his exaggerations, adding his understatements, adding his deception, his lies, his distortion, adding all that stuff to the mix. Just to make sure you're in a real good place behind your fortress. Let's see some other translations of this word strongholds. Fortifications, holds, enemies' strongholds, devil's strongholds. This is interesting, and I wasn't sure which part of it was, but they were both good. Warped philosophies or barriers erected against the truth of God. People's defenses. That's interesting. We were talking about the enemy controlling this, and now we're to people's defenses. You think he's still in charge of that situation? Absolutely. And he makes you believe that this is your defense mechanism, not him. I don't have anything to do with this. I'm innocent. Don't look over here. I'm not involved. Yeah, really? Camps of the enemy. Strong places of the devil. Strongholds of human reasoning. There you go. Strongholds erected against his truth. The walls where the enemy hides. Now, how often are we going to admit that? Yeah, I've got some strongholds in my life. I've got some areas that have walls in which the enemy hides in my life. Yeah, sign me up. The defenses behind which people hide. I really like this one. For the arms of our knighthood be not fleshly, but mighty by God to the destruction of strengths, to the destructions of wardings. The Wycliffe translation is always difficult to read. You have to think about that. It's kind of a different language set. But let's talk about this knighthood thing. We don't think about knighthood anymore. What was the factor of knighthood? What did you have to do as a knight?
Not the king.
Battle for the king, protect the king, protect your citizens, protect the people that were under you. How did you do this? You probably had a sword. You could probably joust. You probably had a small army. You probably had some other resources to take into these battles. But this is saying the arms, the weapons of your knighthood are not fleshly, but they're mighty to God to the destruction of strengths, to the destruction of wardings. Now, this word wardings, think about that. Think a ward. If I say a ward, what do you think of? Mental ward, the psych ward, the ICU ward, the prenatal ward, the mental ward, the prison ward. It's always some place where somebody is being held, not necessarily against their will, but held in an environment for observation, held in an environment for treatment. You're always isolated. So the destruction of the wardings means God wants to remove all those barriers. He wants to get you to a place where you're back out in general population, where you're back out into an area where you can relate to people without special assistance, where you can do things normally without special assistance. Dutch defines strongholds as fortresses constructed in our mind from which we can be ruled or controlled inappropriately. I'll say that again. Fortresses constructed in our mind from which we can be ruled or controlled inappropriately. I heard a different definition recently and I liked it. A stronghold is anything that seems normal to you that would not be considered normal to the average member of that group. I'll say that one again. Anything that seems normal to you that would not be considered normal to an average member of that group. We're talking about spiritual strongholds. So some action or thought that is normal to you, but that is not normal among the typical believers around you. Do you see that? Other people would look at your behavior, would look at your response, would look at your actions, would look at your words, and go, that's not normal. That's not right. But to you, it is perfectly normal. That's what you do every time that comes up. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying that you should be doing it. I'm saying what happens is every time that comes up, here's the code that gets run. And other people would look at that and say, that's not normal. That's a stronghold in your life. The same Greek word for stronghold is also used for prison. They are beliefs through which we are held so captive that we can't escape on our own, just like a prison. For our discussion, they are negative, destructive thought patterns tattooed on the mind. Once developed and allowed to go unchecked, they can imprison a person for life. Adam and Eve had no negative strongholds before the fall. All their mental images were wholesome, life-producing, security-building, and love-motivated. It's highly possible that they had some positive strongholds before the fall. The negative side did not begin until they experienced tormenting fears, painful memories, unclean habits, or wrong beliefs. Now, when did all those start? After the fall. None of those even existed prior to the fall. They became commonplace after the fall. We're to the point now where we cannot comprehend life without them to various degrees. We don't even understand what it was like to not have these things to deal with, to not have these thoughts, to not have this file system in place, or to have it all be positive. Our minds are fully capable of building strongholds on their own, but the enemy really enjoys adding his influence to the construction. Now, I'm going to say this. Remember, the devil cannot create anything. He's not a creator. But every time he opens his mouth, he's lying in one way or another. So what would it look like to have his help with building this stronghold? How's he going to help you build your stronghold? Invalidate your beliefs or validate them, whichever way is the most detrimental. He's going to warp the truth. He's going to distort things. He's going to distort people's motives. He's going to distort how significant this actually was. He's going to minimize certain things that he doesn't want you to think about. He's going to maximize certain things that he shouldn't be focusing on anyway. Right.
Common fact, I'm not a counselor, but the counselor would validate the emotions and the feelings of that person, like a person might have felt in
Yes.
stressful situations, but only in a way to help cope with the situation and help them understand how to come out of that. But it has been warped now to where that is, then we just stop there. Like nowadays, people just stop there and they validate their feelings and who they are and what they felt the emotions, and then that's it. And then they continue to believe that that's the truth. That, oh, I feel validated in my emotions, I feel validated in my feelings, so this must be true for my life, and then that's how they live out the rest of their life. I think that's where, coming back to again, the consistency is something that is actually stable, that will never change.
Yes.
Is the only.
But it's got to be something that's based on actual truth, not just your truth.
Like my true stronghold would be sugar. I'm a diabetic. And he laughs at me all the time. Oh yeah, sugar, that thing can still breathe. And it goes on, so it builds to the point where I get to a point where I'm about to be sick because I just listen to him and yes.
Right.
I just eat a piece of this, that's, yeah. Keep going.
The real danger of it is when these get built and we're not even aware that they're being built. We're clueless to the construction process. So he adds his, you're talking about a counselor, and the goal of the counselor is hopefully to help you out of this mess, to help you see it and help you change. The goal of the enemy is not to help you out of it at all. It's to actually get you entrenched as deeply as he can possibly get you entrenched, as fast as he can possibly get you entrenched.
I think that's smoking mirrors.
Correct. So when he is validating your position or whatever, what's he saying? Oh yeah, you have every right to be ticked off about this. They shouldn't have done that to you. Oh yeah, you have every right to be hurt about this deal. That shouldn't have ever happened. They call themselves Christians. Who do they think they are? They shouldn't have done that. Do you see his help in building the stronghold? What he's saying is not true. But what he wants us to do is accept it as being true. And now that goes into the file for the next time it gets called back up. Now I've got not only this partial truth, but I've got his opinion about it that I believed, that I received, that I accepted. So the next time I'm going to start from that new, this is a bad spot position, and he's going to add to it again. You're already way down the slope here. He's trying to make you a prisoner. He's trying to put you in bondage. So he is deceiving, he is lying, he's adding stuff to the mix at every possible occurrence, knowing that it isn't really about the facts. It's about what you believe to be true about the facts.
It's almost like it's a funny kind of like a paradigm. It's like Satan tries to build prison walls around you. That's what he's doing. It's not like you're building a castle or fortress to keep yourself safe. He's building a prison wall around you.
Yes.
And I think if you think of it from that perspective,
And then he lies about the walls themselves. You see the walls, these shouldn't be here. Oh, they're here to keep you safe. Another lie, another deception. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And he wants you in prison so that you can't harm him in any way, and he didn't have to mess with you anymore. He didn't have to spend any more resources on you because the program's already written. And until you do something, you're just going to keep living out the program. So he can leave you alone and you're going to be a mess. You're not going to hinder him at all. And then he can go mess with the next guy. Events themselves are really neither pleasant or unpleasant. They're really neither good or bad. It's what we believe about them that determines the issue, that determines what happens, if anything, from that event. The subconscious, after a period of time, makes the call about whether this is good or bad based upon how you believed the previous experiences were either good or bad. You don't even get to think about it. I want to bring up Scott's wreck. Here's the picture of his vehicle. Some of you saw this on the messaging system. This happened Friday, I believe you said. Thank goodness nobody was actually harmed in the accident. 5 cars, how many cars? 4 cars on I-40. And I don't think anybody even had to go to the hospital or something. It was
That lady that caused it.
okay. By and large, people came out of it, and this is what happened to his truck. As you look at that and you think, there's no way I can call that good. But it's not really a bad thing either. It's something that happened. Was it desired? No. Was it convenient? No. But was it horrible in the sense that Scott's still walking? He didn't have to go to the hospital. He didn't lose his job. He didn't lose his life. Nobody died. Was it really bad? Not scary, but not really bad. So how this event is going to be processed in him is going to be determined by what he believes about what happened. When does that occur? When does he get to decide what he believes? It starts on Friday. There's part of it that's going to come from his past experience. Have I been in wrecks before? What happened with those wrecks? Part of it is going to be defined by what happens over the next few weeks or months. His belief system is going to be dependent upon, okay, everybody ends up being healed. Everybody ends up walking away. Everybody ends up living. The insurance companies don't get into a fight. All the insurance people do what they're supposed to do. The right people get tickets. The right people don't get tickets. All those things are going to be factors in whether this ends up being good or bad. Right? So it's the jury's still out, basically. If this goes bad, how is Scott going to view the situation? Could it be different if it goes bad versus if it goes good? The answer is yes. What could possibly happen? Okay, he gets a new truck at work. They replace his work truck. And the new truck is a junker. I mean, they're holding it together with baling wire and duct tape, and it just does not work. He's constantly having to fight with it. Is that going to make this event better or worse? It's going to shift it toward the bad side because of how this impacted me. What else could happen? He could get a brand new truck. Yay, this is great. I got an upgrade. I wouldn't have got the upgrade had it not been for the accident, had it not been for the event. So this is a positive thing. What about him driving? He's driving down I-40, the same road that it was on. Oh, here's where that happened the last time. I think I need to slow down here. Or another day. Oh, well. Or
Or I need to do what I need to do, be more aware. In that particular situation, nobody ever really knows exactly what to do in that. But in that particular situation, there was a lot of training that was involved that had it there. I mean, I've been in a lot of different types of safety training as far as companies are concerned and so on and so forth. The way that I handled that situation was actually really good. The good thing that also is for me is that vehicle was low jack, so they can see that I was on cruise control at 61 miles an hour. And it increases to a 65 mile an hour radius between Meridian and Parker. So with that being the state, I was actually going 4 miles under the speed limit, and also with
Cool.
that, and how all that projected the play out of that was, is there was no way for me to, prevent that, because I was 5 car lengths behind somebody. I was in the 3.5 to 4 second, regulation, but when they came to a complete stop, it was an immediate stop. So that 4 seconds actually goes from 4 seconds to 2 seconds. And in that 2 second reaction that I had, I went from a training says, lightly embrace with your arms, to pack with your foot, and embrace the deal, or you could swerve and cause more of an accident. But in that, I realized I was gonna miss, and I'm in the outside lane, so I swerved, and I only had enough time to get mostly out of the way. If you actually blow up that screen, you can see that the impact on that vehicle was only within 8 inches or the width of that
Right.
front tire. And if my instinct was to naturally just go ahead and jerk to the right, I would have entirely missed. But yeah, that actually is played out in the longevity of every single thing that you said, because of all the training, because of all the things that took place. It went from I clearly hit to possibly couldn't have hit or full impact. But also too, the new vehicle, that vehicle there got, new brakes and some other things, but it also needed an entire front end. And I was believing.
Let me get one now.
And, actually, it didn't come out to be a good deal, but it's, Monday or Tuesday, they're gonna go to Kansas City, get my new vehicle from an extra one that's up in Kansas. City.
Awesome. So it sounds like it's still going to be a good experience.
Yeah.
It in itself was bad, but he's going to look back after this all over with favorably upon the event, because it could have been so much worse. But it also could have gone the other direction. The LoJack could have found that he was speeding. The LoJack could have found that he tried to swerve and he shouldn't have. The LoJack could have seen this and this and it. It could go bad. So the event itself doesn't really determine good or bad. It's what you believe about the event, and the jury's still out on that. It sounds like it's going to be favorable. It sounds like it's going to all work out well. Awesome. Yay. Is that going to build a stronghold? Hey, I had a bad experience happening to me and it ended up working out great. It's not going to build a stronghold. His influence is future actions is not going to be influenced by that. He won't be tempted to slow down when he gets to that section of I-40 just because. He won't see these cars lining up beside him or in front of him and start getting sweaty palms or whatever, because something bad could happen now. I'll have more to talk about that with regard to next. Right.
Because
Right.
what it would increase in probability of a situation to happen again.
Yes.
One thing that people need to understand is that that 4-wheel billboard there is somebody could say, oh, they have to slow down. Nobody really understands how much I actually get cut off. If you used to drive that vehicle for 1 week, you'd be like, oh God, I'd just rather drive my own personal vehicle. If people see that vehicle, I'm a target. If I'm doing the speed limit, it doesn't matter if I'm on the highway or not. People get mad at me because I'm doing the speed limit, but I am paid to do the speed.
Right.
And so I get the best figure from everybody. I get you're probably a less child.
Right.
And some people, they're like deliberately, they're be behind me and they go fast and it's deliberate. I mean, like as far, they're cutting me off as far as I'm in like the side of my leg to the very start of that chair that's protruding from the table. And it's like all the time I get cut off.
I'm trying to bully you, but I'm so fast behind you.
I mean, it's amazing how well protected that I am for the guy.
Right.
Protection is on me in
There you
such
go.
a dramatic way.
And it sounds like you have a very healthy attitude about this.
And I'm saying that, and I accept the use, even though this could be, The way that I see that God's protection is not on me, I see it as the way that God's protection is on me.
Right.
And God will turn this entirely in.
Right.
For the company.
Right.
For each individual and for my own well-being, not just for me to get a new upgrade on the vehicle, but for everybody. If they
Yes.
choose to look at it healthy, they will choose to be able to grow and prosper.
We need the address.
I'll get it to you. I'll get it to you. This is a sign up sheet for the, yeah, that's it. Okay, well, we'll pick up there next week. My point with even bringing that up was he has a choice about whether this ends up being a good or a bad thing. It's how he feels about it. It's how the thing ends up turning out for him and its impact on him. I could look at the same thing and go, oh, that's just horrible. It didn't impact me. So it's not going to really build a stronghold in my life, but I could be influencing a stronghold in his life. It doesn't sound like there's going to be one created. Thank God. But do you see the possibility of one being created from this? And it constantly impacting his life from this point forward.